Hello, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and you are watching Tom Talks Rubbish. It's the place for interviews, wrestling reviews, and so much more.
Sure, you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. I highly recommend you subscribe here first.
Good to go, man.
Right. What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and I'm back with the first repeat guest on Tom Talks Rubbish, Jacob from the My Social Life podcast. So how are you doing today, Jacob?
Not too bad, man. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. We just did our little bit of preamble before it started, and yeah, I'm good.
That's good, and I appreciate you having me back on the show. First repeat guest means a lot, man, so thank you.
The question I will start with, and this is a bit of a strange question. I'll ask you that question a bit later. But for people that may not have seen part one, what is My Social Life?
Yeah, so My Social Life is the podcast that I host. It's a top 3% global podcast. It's all a ton of life stories behind the people that you see on social media. So I've had like influencers, managers, social media managers, entrepreneurs, kind of a whole spectrum of people. But I try to keep the main theme being social media. It's kind of varied over the last while as I've gone on for so long. I've expanded on that niche a little bit, but the core has always been social media.
Mm-hmm. So one question that I didn't ask you last time, but I'm curious to know is, are you to get guests, are you tracking people's followers? Like, will you only have them on if they have, say, more than 1,000 followers? Will you only have them on if they exceed your followers, etc.?
Yeah, so in the beginning, like when I first started, I had a rule, it was like 10,000 followers or more, because the impetus of the show was to interview people to learn how to grow on social media. So I wanted to have people that had grown so I could learn. It wouldn't make sense for two guys with 1,000 followers trying to talk about how to grow on social media when neither of us have done it. So my idea was to have people who had grown a following teach me how to grow, but that has evolved over time, and I don't think that rule lasted very long. Maybe not even. I broke that rule in the first 20 episodes. And I just look for people with cool stories and that I can talk to.
Mm-hmm. So how are you? I asked you this a little bit last time, but I want to dig a bit deeper into that. How are you finding these people? Is it literally deep dive, like what stuff that you watch that you're a fan of? Is it like stuff that you find that the internet recommends to you? I'll put it that way.
Yeah, man, it's just kind of keeping my eye out for anything that catches my eye. For the most part, I have like a folder on Instagram and a list on Twitter where I just save people to it. If I stumble upon them, they look interesting. So if like someone I follow tags someone, I click on their profile, I think they're cool, I'll save them to this folder, people to message for my podcast. Sometimes my guests will recommend people to me, so I'll make sure I note that down as well. So honestly, just kind of keeping my eye out and looking for interesting people. And there's no real method to the madness. It's just whenever I stumble upon someone, I'm like, well, that'd be kind of a cool guest. Like, let me reach out.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I'm finding is I'm interviewing people that I'm mainly a fan of. So is that a good way to go, do you think? Or is that a bad way in some ways?
No, man, I think it's a good way to go. I think as a fan, you can ask questions that fans would care more about, if that makes sense. Versus if you come in completely cold, you might not have, like, again, I do the research, but I haven't been watching this person for years. So there aren't questions I've had percolating in my brain for years of watching a given person. So as a fan, you might be able to ask more nuanced questions that a fan would want to know the answer to, versus I can't necessarily do that when I don't follow every single person that I have on the show.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any cons to interviewing people that you're just a fan of, though?
I think the only con is if you make it too apparent that you're a fan. You know what I mean? Like,
definitely.
If the professionalism, and of course, like, it's a conversation, so it is not as like buttoned up as certain things. But if that wall breaks, where you, instead of interviewing them, you just become a fan talking to them, I think that's where you run into trouble with it.
Yep, I've done that a few times. I'll openly admit that.
That's fair. That's fair.
So, should have pulled my list of questions up first. I do apologize. So to peel the curtain back for my fans, we spoke, these will be going up one after the other, but we spoke, what, 4 or 5 months ago?
Remember, man, time flies. Like I was trying to think of that before I jumped on here. I was like, like I went for a walk earlier and I was like, when did we record that podcast? I honestly can't even remember. Actually, no, I do remember. It was in August because I just moved into my new apartment.
Okay. So it was in August and life has got in the way a little bit. Other guests have come on that have followed on from other guests for me, if that makes any sense. So your interview will be going up around the Christmassy period at this point, if that's obviously okay.
Of course, man.
So one thing I'm curious to know about is how has my social life changed at all since we last spoke?
I don't think it's changed a ton, if I'm being completely honest. The biggest change I've made, and hasn't even reflected in the content yet, but it's something I'm going to try out, is on YouTube. I'm going to start splitting the interviews up a little bit. So, for example, I just interviewed a guy last week. The episode will come out in a couple of weeks from when we're recording this right now. But the first probably 30 minutes of the podcast, we talked about kind of student entrepreneurship and the businesses he started in college and things like that, and the groups he started on campus around entrepreneurship. And then the second half of the interview, we talked about a new media company he started that he's growing specifically on TikTok. And so I left it as a whole interview for the podcast, but when I put it on YouTube, I broke it into 2 sections. I did the student entrepreneurship video and a video about his TikTok media company and how to grow on TikTok, because that can be 2 completely different audiences that I can attract with that one video, versus if you click on a video that you think is about a TikTok media company and the first half hour is about student entrepreneurship, you might be more apt to click off. So now that's probably the biggest change, and that's only something I literally did. I've just started it. We'll see if I keep doing it. But that's probably the biggest change. I'm trying to tailor the content a little bit more on YouTube now.
That actually leads me to a follow-up question. With having a podcast, but as well as having a YouTube channel, do you feel like one suffers because of the other or vice versa?
I don't think either suffer because of the other. I think it can be 2 different audiences. I will say that YouTube, you should definitely, if you have a podcast, be on YouTube, because the discoverability on YouTube is much greater than the podcast platforms. You know what I mean? Like getting recommended a podcast doesn't happen as often as getting recommended YouTube videos and discovering new creators that way. So if you have a podcast, make sure you're getting that content up on YouTube in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. So, but if you only have a YouTube channel, would you recommend having a podcast?
If you're doing like interviews like what we're doing right now, or if you have like any kind of YouTube channel?
If both.
I think if you're doing interviews already, it's very easy to just rip the audio from your video and upload it to the podcast. So I definitely, if you have the content available, it does not take very long to export it as audio and then throw it up on a platform like Anchor, which distributes it to all the major podcast platforms. If you have just a regular YouTube channel, say you're a vlogger or whatever it might be, I don't think I don't think podcasting is quite as necessary. It's not as easy a step if you're doing other kinds of content that's not an interview. But I think it all comes down to, if you have a regular YouTube channel, again, it's not mandatory. It's doing the content you enjoy doing. And if you want to do a podcast, by all means, I think podcast is a great networking tool. It's a great way to collaborate with people that you might not necessarily get the opportunity as a smaller YouTuber. So there are benefits. But I think at a minimum, if you're doing an interview show like this one, definitely be ripping that audio and putting it up on Anchor.
Because that is something, just to peel the curtain back about myself, that is a 2022 goal, I should say, is to look into making my interviews available as a podcast.
Definitely, man. I would recommend looking at Anchor. It's free, it's easy, and it distributes it to like Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Anchor.fm is the website.
I'll look into that. Thanks, man.
No worries.
One thing that I've found with your interview style is they're very conversational, but you're very good at letting other people talk, and that might sound really general, but you'll know what I'm saying. How do you not interrupt people as much? Because that is something that I'm really struggling with as an interviewer, because I'll think of a question as they're talking and I'll be like, and they'll still be telling a monologue in almost.
I don't know where that's come from, but I that's definitely something I do is I try very, very hard not to interrupt my guests. And now it's a pretty natural thing. Like I try to remember those questions as they come up. Sometimes I forget them because it's such a long monologue to your point. But it's something I've developed over the course of doing the podcast. And I think part of that too is if you don't interrupt them sometimes and you just let them talk, even sometimes they think they're going to end that monologue, but they don't hear you asking a follow-up question right away. So they kind of keep going. And sometimes that can lead you to areas they don't normally talk about because they normally get cut off at that point. But I try to let them go longer and just see where they ramble on to if that leads us somewhere new that they've never talked about before. But I appreciate you saying that the interviews sound like conversations because I try really like, I don't look at them that way. I look at them as interviews, but I've gotten that before is that they sound like conversations. But I'm so prepped and I have so much of the podcast laid out in advance that I'm very particular with the questions I'm going to ask. So it means a lot that it sounds like it's very natural, kind of off the cuff, but it is all, I script a lot of it. Like the guest doesn't know, like I know where the guest is going to go sometimes so I can push them in certain directions. So it means a lot that you said it sounds like a conversation.
It definitely does, man. Like you and I have talked about this a lot, but you are definitely an interviewer that, as I've been doing more of these, I feel like a pest at times because I do find myself, if I come up with something that I could improve on, I'll just give Jacob a message. How can I improve on this?
Man, and you're not a pest at all, so don't worry about that. Sometimes I am like candidly, I'm slow at answering, and sometimes I'm the worst at answering. So like, if I haven't answered you for a minute, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just the worst sometimes at answering messages. I'm trying to like keep my notifications to a minimum too, but by no means are you a pest. So don't worry about that.
Nah, and I appreciate that, man. Like, so one thing we talked about a lot during the part one of this, if you haven't seen part one, by the way, it will be in the description below. Make sure you check it out if you haven't already. That's the plug out the way. I feel like a shill now. Is the fact that you do a lot of research on your guests, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So how, and one thing we talked about was you want to get rid of your third step, which was correct.
I have got my third step was at writing supplementary questions. So it's like step one is just research as much as I can. Step two is organize it into a flow that I'm happy with. And step three is then write supplementary questions on top of all the research I've already done. But I have cut that out entirely from the workflow. So now my research process takes me 2 days instead of 4 or 5.
That answers my question, to be honest, man. I was going to ask, have you got rid of it?
Yeah, so I have, and it's been great. It's made the process a lot better. I just started dragging my heels on writing those questions, and it would take what would normally take a day, 2-3 days, because I was dragging my heels on. I didn't want to do it, so I just cut it out. And I trusted myself as an interviewer to be able to kind of do interviews off the cuff a little bit. And I did one a couple weeks ago with a friend of mine. And the first 30 minutes I had like some stuff, but like we kind of took it in a direction I wasn't planning. And I just kind of hung in that conversation for half an hour. So I just learned to trust myself as an interviewer more. I felt like I needed all these questions because I wouldn't think of what to ask. But 3 years in, I finally trusted myself to not have to write out an extra, I don't know, it was like 50 to 100 questions.
Mm-hmm. You talked about trusting yourself as an interviewer then. When did that process start? Like you thinking, I'm good at this. That's the wrong word, but like I'm good enough at this to not need the crutch of questions.
Yeah, it was a few months ago. Like it would have been around the time we started talking, probably even a month or two before that. I kind of started experimenting with it here and there just to kind of see how it would go. And I think part of that too, like part of the reason I felt I needed those questions is I had it in my head for so long that my interviews need to be like around the 90-minute mark. Like minimum, I was like, my target was at least an hour and a half, which is fine. And I've had most of my interviews since I've stopped doing this have still run for that long. But if an interview isn't running, like if I'm having a conversation and I don't think it's going to go for 90 minutes, there's no shame in ending it early. Having a 60-minute podcast is not the end of the world. And it's better to have a 60-minute podcast where you get all your good questions in than a 90-minute podcast where you're throwing in softball questions that don't really matter just to try and stretch it that extra half an hour. So that's another shift I've made in my mentality. But that being said, my interviews have still ran for 90 minutes most of the time. So it hasn't really made a big impact on the show, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. You talked about like having an interview go an hour and then just be like, okay, I'm okay with that. We'll end it there. But have you ever had a guest, because I have, a couple of times I've done interviews go, I can do an interview, but look, I can only spare X, Y, Z. Have you had that?
Oh yeah, and the shortest one that's happened to me was a 15-minute one, and I did that. That was my 40th episode with John Lee Dumas, who hosts the popular podcast Entrepreneurs on Fire. He gave me 15 minutes, and I don't think it was a great interview. That was really short for me. I think I would have approached it a lot differently if I were to do it today. But yeah, that has happened all the time, and sometimes honestly, it's like it's not the end of the world. Even like when someone says I only have an hour, it's the worst when someone tells me they only have an hour after they accept a 90-minute interview and I prep for a 90-minute interview and then they show up after I've done everything and they've in their calendar, they've accepted 90 minutes and they sit down and they go, I can only do an hour. And I'm like, just let me know before so I don't prep as much as I did. But even though, so that's not the end of the world. That means I'm just extra prepped. And if they come up for a second interview, I'm already ready to go. So it's not the end of the world. But it does happen on occasion for people. Normally they cut it off at an hour. Sometimes I've had people try to say they only have an hour. And then as we get going, they tell me I have as much time as I want. That's happened a couple times. But long way to answer your question, but yes, it has happened.
Mm-hmm. Just you won't know who this is because it's a wrestling person, but I had it with someone called Brian Zane from a wrestling YouTube channel.
Okay.
He was like, I'd love to do your show, but I've only got 30 minutes because like he just had a lot planned that day. So you know what? And I was like, you know what? I'll take what I can get. And I just feel like for me personally, that was one of my better interviews because I wasn't trying to, like yourself, I wasn't trying to fill an hour because I like my interviews to go an hour.
It forces you to be concise and ask the high value questions right off the bat and just get straight to it. Which is something I wrestle with is like, should I just make my interviews half an hour to force myself to do that? But then I don't know how I feel about that. But no, I hear you on that.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I am curious to know about was what was the interview that you were like, I'm good at this, but that's the wrong word. But like you were comfortable as an interviewer and then was like, I want to do more of this.
That's a good question. I don't really know when exactly that was. I think early on, I kept getting little mentions here and there, like, wow, you really did your research. And I was like, and that just kept happening. And I got a few compliments on my voice early on, and that was really motivating. But I don't know if I could, I don't know if there was a specific interview where I did, and I was like, this is the thing. I just think it just kept building. Like, I think I used to get so excited. I think even if I had to give you, I'd say episode 1, episode 2, like episode 1 was with my friend and it was a really good interview and I enjoyed doing that. And then episode 2 was with someone I didn't know. And that went really well. And we had a good podcast and a good conversation. So you could even say one of those first 2 episodes, first one was a good friend of mine. It was a great podcast. But I think that second one was a stranger I didn't know that drove all the way to my house to record the interview. And we had a great conversation. And it was this guy who was like an ultra marathoner, like one of the best, like world-class ultra marathoner from my city. And I just happened to find him on Instagram, message him. He came out to my house. And like, I used to get so stoked after every podcast. So honestly, you could probably go back early. Like one of the first couple episodes is when I kind of fell in love with it.
This is going to sound like a very almost backhanded question. And I do apologize for that. But like you say, you used to get stoked for podcasts. Do you still get stoked to do them?
Yeah, and I heard myself say that as I said it, and I do still get stoked 100%. I just think the difference now, I will say, is that like when I started, I didn't think.
Sorry about that.
No worries, dude. When I started, I didn't think that anybody was going to say yes to me. So when people did say yes to me, it was like a crazy big deal. But now it's like that, like there was like a novelty to that. So now obviously being 3 years in, like, and I've had some bigger name guests. Now I know when people say yes, like it's based off of the work versus the work I've done these last 3 years and kind of the reputation I've built. But early on, it was just strangers trusting me with 90 minutes of their time. And I think so it's part of the novel, that fact, and the fact that I didn't expect anybody to actually say yes to coming on my show. And so that was part of the reason why I think there was a little bit of extra excitement early on, and it was still new. I still get excited. My girlfriend always says like it takes me a good half hour to kind of calm down after an interview because I'm just so excited and I'm kind of buzzing around my apartment. So there is still that feeling, but I think it was just more novel early on.
Because like I will because I've started doing my own editing and my own thumbnails and stuff now, because I've realised you can't rely on people for poo in this life, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, while I'm editing this, because I'll do it tonight because I'm weird, like, I can't go to bed knowing I've still got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll edit it tonight and be like, and do the thumbnail and still be buzzing, as weird as that sounds.
Not weird at all. Not weird at all.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing I am curious to know about is, hang on, I should have pulled this up beforehand. I do apologize.
All good.
Who is on your because when we spoke in the last conversation, you said that there wasn't really interviewers that you looked up to that made you realize, oh, this is what I want to do. But who is on your interviewer Mount Rushmore?
It's a very good question. And I don't know if I have any good answers for you on that. I think like I'm a fan of Tim Ferriss. I think Tim Ferriss is one. Pardon?
Feel like you mentioned him during our last conversation.
That's probably true. Because I feel like I didn't model myself after anybody, but I feel like just not serendipitously, but like through osmosis almost. I don't know if that's the right term. But like my interview style is kind of like a mix of Tim Ferriss, Guy Raz, and Sean Evans. And that's just because those were podcasts and interviews that I watched before starting my show. But I didn't sit down and start my podcast with the intention of kind of being a blend of those guys. But it just happened to happen is because that's just what I was consuming and that's how it came out. So I've described my podcast, not often, but in the past, it's kind of like how I built this without kind of their editing. Cause I just let how I built this they edit their conversations. They have like sound effects and all this stuff, but I just kind of let mine run as one big story. But how I built this is very much from the beginning to the end, like it chronicles the whole journey, similar to my show does. I've been told my delivery sounds like Sean Evans in certain instances. My research is like Sean Evans. And then Tim Ferriss is another one that does a lot of deep research in preparation for his interviews. So I think I'm a kind of an amalgamation of those three guys, but not intentionally, just kind of happened naturally, I'll say.
Yeah, I get that. So one thing you did talk about was research and stuff like that. And has how you do your research changed at all since we last spoke? Or is it still you find the person, deep dive on social media, just deep dive into their content and immerse yourself in their content for a day or two?
Pretty much. I'm going to prep for one interview tonight. I'm going to do part of it, and I'm going to just Google his name. I'll go through the minimum first 5 pages of Google, and then I'll keep going every page after that until I don't click on a link on one of those pages. Scroll through his Instagram. And I downloaded probably like 4 or 5 podcasts he's been on. I don't know if I'm going to listen to all of them, maybe a couple. But I like to listen to podcasts and play FIFA at the same time and just pause the game and take notes as interesting things are said. Just because I can't just sit there and listen to a podcast. I get too bored. So I just have some stimulus going with FIFA while I play that mindlessly while focusing on the podcast.
That answers my follow-up question, which was going to be, does FIFA help you to absorb the information a little bit more?
I wouldn't say it helps me to absorb the information a little bit more, but just gives me maybe it does, I guess, because I probably zone out if I just sit on my couch and listen to a podcast. But maybe not, because I usually pause the game every like 30 seconds to a minute because I'm taking so many notes. But I guess it helps the process a little bit for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I feel really bad because I keep looking at my list of questions. What are some goals? Because obviously there's a chance this podcast could go out in 2022, but I'm hoping it will be like my last interview of the year. What are some of your goals for my social life in 2022?
To stay consistent with it. That's obviously a big goal for 2022. I think maybe get some bigger name guests on the show. I mean, I don't really have any specific goals, and I should be. And I think that's something I need to improve on personally. It's just goal setting. I feel like I've never really set specific goals and strive for them. Things have just kind of happened, really. Like I've never operated with a long-term goal or anything like that. So kind of thinking on the spot here. I think I'm debating like even niching the show back down, like and really focusing on creators in 2022 and seeing where that takes me. But nothing too crazy specific in terms of goal with the show. Just keep it consistent every single week. Every Monday, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, a new interview drops, and it has every week for 3 years. I don't want that streak to end.
That answers my follow-up question again. was, have you missed a week yet?
So early on, so when the show started, it was every 2 weeks because every 2 weeks I wanted to make sure I could keep up. And then I did that for the first 3 episodes, and then I moved downtown in the city that I live. And it was during that move and everything I missed, and I couldn't get an interview booked, so I missed an interview between 3 and 4. But then I got every episode since episode 4, and I think it was after episode 7 where I went from 2 weeks down to 1 because my backlog was getting too long. And so every episode since episode 4, which has been 160 episodes now, I haven't missed.
We must have not spoken for at least 3 months because you were only on 140 or so last time we spoke.
Yeah, and so the amount of episodes I have will carry me to the end of November. So yeah, it's definitely been a few months for sure.
Mental to think I've got interviews till the end of the year. I'm not gonna lie.
That's crazy, man. That's so good. There's nothing worse than that stress of knowing you need an interview coming up. I haven't ever had where I don't have an interview the following Monday, but I've gotten down to a 1 week runway a couple times. I'm like, I need to build this backlog back up.
What is your ideal? Is backlog the right word?
That's what I use, backlog, runway. I don't know. I usually just change whatever word comes to mind. I try to keep it at least a month. 4 to 6 weeks is my happy area. But I try to keep it at least a month.
So, who are some of your dream guests for 2022? I know you said you might want to talk about content, just niching it back down to content creators. But if I said to you, put it out into the universe, who are your dream guests for 2022?
I think Gary Vee's always got to be on that list, Gary Vaynerchuk. And I'm actually going to VCon, his convention, in May. So who knows? Something cool could happen.
Fingers crossed, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Gary Vee's always one. Philip DeFranco is a YouTuber I've watched since I was 15 years old. So almost going on 10 years. Next year will be 10 years of watching him, which is crazy. I've watched him. No, what I was going to say isn't actually right. But I've watched him for almost 10 years now, which is crazy. And so I would love to have him, probably like the first YouTuber I really ever watched and became a fan of, Philip DeFranco. Other dream guests, I think there's probably some, like, I know I just said I want to niche down to content creators, but I also have dream guests that are non-content creator specific. Like I'd like to have some different screenwriters / directors on the podcast as well, because that's an interest of mine. So guys like Quentin Tarantino, Aaron Sorkin on the podcast would be pretty cool. David Fincher. Those are some film guys. I'm trying to think of anybody else I'd like to have on the show. I mean, Mr. Beast would be cool because he's the biggest creator on the planet. But I wouldn't necessarily mark him as a dream guest or someone I've always been like the gold star. But a lot of these dream guests are people that I've just been a fan of or followed their work for a while. Stephen Bartlett's another one I'd love to have a chance to sit down and talk with. But those are just some off the top of my head.
Is there anyone that you're like, okay, I'm not too fussed if I get to interview them, but like if they agree to just have a conversation with me, that's the dream sort of thing, if that makes any sense.
Like if they said they'd talk to me, but I couldn't record it, is that what you're saying?
Basically, yeah. You worded that question a lot better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, like I would never turn down an opportunity if someone's willing to give me their time, but they didn't feel comfortable coming on the podcast. Like, I'm still happy to chat. I won't do the same amount of research by any means if it's not going to be recorded, but I would never ever turn down somebody because they didn't want to be recorded. If I reached out to someone, I asked to talk to them, and they said yes, but I don't want to record it. I just want to chat. I'd always do that. I'd never say no.
Mm-hmm. So, and this again might sound like a bit of a backhanded question, and I do apologize for that. And I need to stop apologizing. It's very weird. It's like my crutch that I've got a habit into. But you find that your research is maybe a bit of is crutch the right word?
Yeah, no, crutch is the right word. And don't worry about apologizing. I'm Canadian, so you're good. But I don't know. I might be not necessarily a crutch. I think I could be a bit of a crutch, I guess. I thought about it before of whether it is one or not. And I think part of the thing with that is that I've just been able to separate myself because of the research. Yeah. And so I feel like I have to continue doing it. But I'm trying to develop that skill again. Part of that is scaling back the research process, so it's not as much. I've debated just like very casually starting a separate podcast that's just a screenwriting specific podcast where I don't do any prep. So I force myself to develop that skill, being able to just sit down cold and do an interview. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's a big crutch. I think it's actually a big differentiator for my show and allows me to separate myself and stand out. So I don't think it's a crutch now.
No, I would 100% agree with that, my friend. Like the thing that I love about listening to your podcast, and the one that I will bring up, is the co-founder of Starbucks, which I personally think is one of your best interviews. Just to toot your own horn, just to toot your horn a little bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm like, I never knew who the co-founder of Starbucks was, but after listening to your conversation, it's like, I feel like I've met this person.
Yeah, no, that one was definitely, I definitely, not to sound arrogant, but I definitely felt like that was an interview. Like I really wanted to make sure I nailed that interview, and I feel like I did. And that was one of the ones where he only had an hour. And then I checked with him at 55 minutes, and I was like, hey, just so you know, we got 55 minutes left. I can wrap this up here. Like I got to a point, which was my goal, was like, I could cut it at the hour mark, but I had what I would talk about if we were to keep going.
If he said we could go a bit longer.
Yeah, and we got to 55 minutes, and I was like, hey, we're at 55 minutes, 5 minutes, do you want me to start wrapping this up? And he goes, no, you have as much time as you want. And so I didn't want to take forever, so I just went for the extra half hour. But yeah, it was definitely an interview I was really proud of.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked a lot about guests. Is carrying on the interview the right phrase? I'm very tired, I'm not going to lie.
What do you mean by carrying on the interview?
Like letting you saying they only have a certain amount of time, but then giving you more time. Do you think that's because they were a bit wary of you as an interviewer and not like didn't know much about you as an interviewer, and then was like, this guy's really good, so we'll carry on, sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't happen too often. Like, it's very rare where someone will say to keep going. I think it's only happened like Zeb, the co-founder of Starbucks, and then maybe one or two other times. But I think people are very protective of their time, and they don't want to commit to something. Like, anyone can start a podcast, anyone can do an interview. So you never know exactly what you're signing up for when you say yes to a podcast. And I don't think anyone ever expects the volume of research I've done. And so I think when they do, it's just almost like out of a tip of the hat. As like they've acknowledged the respect I've given them by doing so much work, that they kind of give some like, not that they haven't given me respect if they don't proceed, but like that they just appreciate the volume of work I've done in preparation. And so they're willing to just stick around because they know I've put the work in.
Side note, just as a little funny story, I had a panic then because I thought we weren't recording.
I honestly I had that like a minute ago. I had the same panic where I looked down on my controls here and it gave me the option to record. And I was like, what do you mean? And then I look and it's recording top left hand corner. So we're good. And if we even hadn't been, I'd do it again. Don't worry.
I was like, phew. So one thing I've spoke about a lot is you've given me a lot of great advice on where I can improve, how to get guests, etc. So if I said to you, 5 pieces of advice for young interviewers, aspiring interviewers, etc., what are some of advice that you'd give the aspiring interviewers?
We're looking for 5?
Just some pieces of advice. It doesn't have to be 5.
I think one is just, you don't have to do the prep work the way I do it. Find the interviewing style that suits you the best. It doesn't have to be excessive research. It doesn't have to be an hour and a half long. If you're really good coming in cold and doing a 30-minute interview, do that. Play to your strengths. Don't try to play to someone else's. That's a big one. 2 would be, I had another one in my head. 2, don't psych yourself out of reaching out to guests. I think that's one thing we talked about last time, was like, just shoot your shot with people because you never ever know who's going to say
I do
yes.
that now.
Yeah. And like, you never know, right? Like at the end, again, if you reach out to somebody and they say no, nothing has changed. If you reach out to somebody, if you don't reach out to someone, they're not coming on your podcast. If you do reach out to someone and they say no, they're still not coming on your podcast. So the end result is the exact same. The only thing that's changed is maybe a hit to your ego, but you can get over that. And then if they say yes, then they're coming on your show now. And you interview this person you were excited to interview. And so don't ever psych yourself out of reaching out to somebody. Other than that, I think, I don't know, man, like that. I'm trying to think on the spot here of some other advice I would give to.
I didn't prep him on questions. I'll say that.
No, and I never, even if someone ever sends me prep questions, I don't like to read them. I like to come in cold because I don't like to have answers prepped and ready to go. It's not as fun.
I think I asked you last time, but I don't think I asked you this time, did I?
Ask me about questions? No, I don't think so.
I definitely asked you last time just because, again, where I've interviewed a lot of my friends, that was a habit I'd gotten into.
Yeah, no, and like I don't send questions in advance either unless somebody wants to see them. And even when they do ask, I don't even send them all the questions because I would hate to overwhelm somebody with like 6-7 pages of notes of this is what I have planned, and I just send them like a condensed outline with some like example questions for different sections.
Just an FYI, you told me to steal that last time, and that is exactly what I did.
That's good. That's good. I'm trying to think of some other advice for interviewers. Is maybe if you just start, like that's a big one. Like so many people want to start a podcast, they want to do this and that, but you're only gonna improve by starting. You know, I think I had the idea for 6 months before I started, and I wasn't ready when I started. But by actually doing them, I got better. So that's a big one. Is make sure you're doing it consistently because that's how you'll improve.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about dream guests and stuff, but when was the moment that you were like, because I still feel like I have to not dictate my guest's timeline, but like if my guests gives me a date and time that they can do the interview, I feel like I have to rearrange my personal schedule around that. And I don't feel like confident enough yet to say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me. Can we do blah, 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 blah? Are you still like that? Or are you now at a point where you can go, okay, I can do the interview then, and you give them a time? And I'm sorry, that was a very wordy question.
No, I know what you're saying, and I use Calendly now, and so it's just a website that connects to your calendar, and you can set specific times you're available. So whenever anyone says yes, I just send them a link to my Calendly, and I say, hey, book whatever time works best for you, but it's already set to times that work for me. And then they can just pick the one that suits their schedule best. And so now as long as like with that, everyone's happy and it's a time that works for both of us.
I say this every time we talk, but I may steal that yet again.
Do it. Steal everything that you want to steal.
I feel bad because I feel like I just rip you off sometimes.
You don't rip me off. And one thing, actually, the only thing I will say not to steal is this mustache. This was just for Movember that we're doing here. So don't try and do this. This was, I don't know how I'm feeling. I just shaved yesterday. I'm not sure if I'm a mustache guy.
Bro, I can't grow a mustache. Like a nice one. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah.
The sooner this beard can go and my carer can help me out with that, I'm happy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, but no, don't be afraid of stealing, right? I think there's that quote. It's like the best artists steal. It's a little bit different in this context, but it's like everything is a remix at the end of the day. And so it's not necessarily stealing, but it's taking what other artists have done and doing it in your own style. And that's what the best artists do.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me nicely to a segue actually of you talked about me using a lot of what you would do, but what do you find that if someone asks you to do an interview on their channel, you're more understanding if they have to reschedule or if they can't do that time because you're a fellow interviewer and you know how hard the prep work and the getting the time in is?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I mean, like, I try to be pretty laid back with these things anyways, but definitely like having done it for a few years now, like I definitely have some empathy and understanding of what goes into doing an interview like this. So for sure, I mean, like I have no problem with most things when it comes to being a guest on other people's show.
It's like, to peel the curtain back again, we were supposed to do this tomorrow at time of recording, but I've just had another interview confirmed. And I didn't feel like I could, because again, I don't feel like I'm at that point where I can dictate to certain people.
Yeah, I hear you.
I was like,
yeah,
I'm going to have to ask him, but if he says no, we'll have to reschedule for another time.
Yeah. No, but I had nothing too crazy going on this evening, so it worked out well.
Brilliant. So as we wrap this up, because we've been going for about 40 minutes, and I think with part 1 and part 2, that's a nice length. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who, if someone says to you, do I need a formal education to do interviewing? Is that something you believe in? Or do you think someone, as long as they have access to the equipment and the ideas to interview someone, they can do it?
Of course, anybody can do an interview. I didn't learn how to do interviews from school. I didn't learn any of the technical stuff from school. I think the only place where school would probably come into play with my podcast is I had to do different research assignments in school. So I think part of the how I do the research, and I kind of honed the skill of research in college. So I think that's probably where the greatest crossover is from school. One thing I will say though is if you are a student and you're starting a podcast, that can be to your benefit. Because when you reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm a student, that already puts you in their favor, more so than if you're just a random person reaching out. So definitely if you are a student, use that card to your advantage. And sometimes I wish I'd started my show when I was in college, so that when I did reach out to people, I could say, hey, I'm a student, this is my show. Because people are always willing to, more often than not, they're willing to help students out.
Why do you think that is, as silly as that sounds?
I don't know. It's a good question. I haven't really thought about it, to be completely honest. But maybe they just think back to when they were in college and they think if they'd gotten help from someone, how it could help their career potentially. But I haven't really thought about it too much.
Fair enough. So we've talked about a lot of dream guests and your hopes for 2022 and stuff like that. But what is some stuff for my social life that you're like, I want to leave that in 2021, like I don't want to do that in 2022?
Yeah, I don't really know, to be completely honest. I haven't thought about things I want to leave behind because, like, especially into 2022, like I kind of just make adjustments on the fly. Like I haven't really let the changing of the calendar influence when I make changes. Like I really just kind of do them whenever I get like whenever like the idea will happen, and then if that idea sticks around, I'll make the changes. Like I had a clips channel for a while this year and I stopped that one. I used to have a templated thumbnail I'd use, but now I design all my thumbnails, unique thumbnails for each individual episode. So I've already made some of those changes that I would probably use for this answer, like not having a templated thumbnail and things like that. So I just kind of make the changes as I see them, as I decide to do them. So I don't really have anything that, as of right now, I'm saying I want to leave in 2021 and as we head into 22, because I've made those changes already.
Mm-hmm. So you're not a New Year's resolutions guy by the sound of it then, no?
Yes and no. Like I definitely take some time to reflect at the new year and figure out what I want to like think a little bit. Like I set a couple, I only remember one goal that I set for this year, and that was to read 50 books. And I think I've read 46 so far. So I'm on pace.
Not bad.
Yeah. So I'll finish it before the end of the year. I'll make sure of that. But I remember I set some goals last year. And I don't even remember what they were. So like I try to take some time to reflect on the year though. That's something I started last year. But I've never been a crazy New Year's resolution guy. I think you can set goals and make adjustments at any point in time. I think definitely birthdays and New Year's are times where I take time, think a little bit more on those things. But I think you can make those changes at any point in time.
Mm-hmm. Just to let people know about me, I set the goal of when we did our interview, having an interview for every week. And I reached it somehow.
You did. Let's go. I'm stoked for you, man. That's so awesome.
Like, do you ever look back? I think I asked you this last time, and I will say there may be some questions that I asked Jacob last time that I cover again. And that's just because that's the way the conversation's gone. Like, do you ever have to look back and go, how the hell did I get to interview this person? Or how the hell have I done this many interviews?
I don't think so. It's never looking back and been like, how the hell did this happen? I'll look back and just kind of like reflect on the work that I've done. Because I think everywhere.
Not how the hell, that might be the wrong phrase, but like
I can't believe this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that's never really been a thought I've had when it comes to the show. I think I've just, the volume of work I've put in, I feel like I don't know if this sounds arrogant, but like I feel like I put in the work to earn those interviews. They didn't fall in my lap. It came from hundreds of hours of work of prepping and interviewing and honing the craft and getting better and better and better and doing a good enough job that people are willing to introduce me to these awesome people to come on the show. So it's never been like, I can't believe this happened for the most part. Maybe early on when I got into VaynerMedia, when I was in New York City and some stuff like that. But for the most part, like I just keep rolling with these interviews. I've never really had like, no, it's never been, I just like, again, I feel like I'm rambling, but long answer, right? I feel like I've put the work in now. So it's on the back of a lot of work. It's not just something that I got luckily.
Mm-hmm. This is going to sound like maybe a bit of a backhanded question, but like, do you believe that people that don't do as much research, such as myself, because that's just what works for me, don't put the work in, as silly as that may sound?
No, I don't think so. I think that you still put the work in. Like I said, it's playing to your strengths, and it would be silly to put extra work in and extra time doing the podcast just to say you're doing it. Like if you can do it in such a way where you're happy with it and you're doing it into your strengths and it requires less time, like why wouldn't you?
Do you believe like this is this job, quote unquote, is this your full-time job, out of curiosity?
No, kind of. So my sponsor, the sponsor of the show, my partner in my show is a company called TrueFan. And TrueFan was a client of mine when I had my marketing business. And then I decided to join TrueFan full time because they were putting out a new product I believed in, and there was an opportunity there for me to join the team. So I joined the team full time. And because we kind of partnered with the show, they're a sponsor. Their CEO said that could now be part of my daily responsibilities. It's my podcast. So the podcast isn't my full-time job, but it got added to the responsibilities of what my full-time job is. So it's a part of my job description to do my podcast now. So technically, but not actually.
Okay. So the long-winded question I was going to ask was, do you believe this is the sort of field then that you can't be a part of if you're not passionate about it?
I think you can be in part of this field if you're not passionate about it, but I think with any field, it'll be better if you are. And you should only do this if you are passionate about it. You should do whatever you're doing if you're passionate about it. I think you need to enjoy what you're doing. But now, with that being said, it's not enjoying. I think people get confused when you talk about passion because that makes them feel like they have to love every single part of the process from start to finish. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Like, there's moments when I'm doing my prep work and I'm like, man, I don't want to do this prep work. But I love sitting down and interviewing someone. That high is still there, like I talked about. So I am passionate about interviewing. That doesn't mean every day is amazing, but I'm passionate enough that when I do have those bad days, I keep going. And if that passion's not there and you love what you do, those bad days are going to be more inclined to give up. And I think also passion develops over time. And so it doesn't, like, you're never going to try something once and like the skies are going to open. You're like, this is the thing I'm passionate about. It's like passion develops after you do something and you put the work in over a consistent period of time and you get better and you see results, is when passion develops. So it starts with a minor area of interest and grows over time.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I completely forgot my question there. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
so that happens. No worries, man.
What was I gonna say? So, like, with being passionate, when you have a bad day, whether it comes to like the research or maybe interviews gone bad, what is it that you do to get yourself out of that bad day rut? And then what is that you do to calm down your post-interview high?
I mean, I don't try to calm down the post-interview high. I just enjoy it, I think.
Okay.
So I don't really, I just live in that moment. In terms of like the bad days, I mean, I don't really have a good answer for that. I think that's something I'm still figuring out. I think getting outside, going for a walk and breathing fresh air is always important. I get like getting hit by the sunlight. Or even, and it also like, I don't really have like, I can't remember an interview where I've come out being really down about it. And so I mainly just be like the research when it's like the end of the day, I've worked all day. It's like 9 o'clock at night and I'm still doing research for the podcast. Sometimes I just stop doing it because I have my backlog of episodes. I don't have to do the research today. And so I can just take that break and I just don't have to do it today. And so sometimes it's just allowing yourself to stop and take a break. That's how I've gone through those bad days. It really, like that's just the honest answer. Sometimes you feel like you always have to be working, but resting is also an important part of that equation. So if I feel like I need a break, I just take one.
So is taking a break something you struggle with?
yes, very much so.
Yeah, because I'm the same, because I'm still at the point where this doesn't feel like work.
That's good.
Do you know what I mean?
Good.
So like, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, I get to interview Jacob, who I find really cool, or some other cool people that I've had on. So this doesn't feel like work. So it's like, I remember one day I did, what was it? Since the last time we spoke, 4 interviews in a day.
That's awesome.
And by the end of that time, I was like, need water, can't speak.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was
4 in a
like,
day.
and then my mum was like, you're not doing that again. Like, you physically, because the next day, because of my physical needs, we'll put it that way, I couldn't move.
Yeah. 4
So
is
it
a
was like,
lot.
so
4
it's
is a
like,
lot in a day.
you're not doing that again, Tom. So now I think maximum I do is 2 a day. But what
I
is
only
the
do
maximum? I was going
I
to
do
ask
one.
that. What is the maximum that you'll do in a day?
Unless I only do 1 really. And I have that in that Calendly thing I told you about. I have it set that if someone books a podcast in my day, that day is now grayed out on Calendly. So you can't actually book another podcast on that day. So I have it set like that. I don't know if I've done 4. I'm trying to remember my trip to New York. I've done at least 3 in a day, potentially
You said
4.
you did 5. You said you did 10 in a week.
I did 10 in 6 days, but I don't remember if it was how many, if we ever had a day where we did 4. I know at least 3. Yeah, I don't know if I ever had 4, but no, but now I only do 1 a day. Because 2 a day is not nice, because I have this runway. Like if I ever do 2 a day again, it's going to be one when I'm at VCon and I'm just trying to knock out interviews while I'm there in person.
Yeah.
So that if a special occasion, of course, I'll do multiple in a day. But on a regular day, I don't need to do 2 in a day. I have this backup now of all my episodes. I don't have to do that. I still have a job that has to get done. I still have a life I try to live. And so if that person can't do that day, we'll just do it sometime in the next week and we'll make it work. So I'm not too worried about knocking out a bunch in a single day.
I think for me, it was at that point, I was still trying to quote unquote prove myself and didn't feel like I could say to people no. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So have you
No, it does.
learned to say no now? And do you struggle saying no to people?
I definitely struggle with it. But again, that Calendly thing's been great because I don't really have to say no to people, really, when it comes to the podcast specifically. And I don't normally say no, to your point. Like I try to make it as accommodating as possible to the guest. But saying no is definitely something I'm not the best at.
Mm-hmm. So, like, one thing I am curious about is say that you get a lot of compliments on your voice when interviewing. But what is there something specific you have to do before and after you go on camera before to get your voice like podcast ready? Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, I mean that works. And no, I can just kind of turn the voice on whenever I don't even turn on like consciously. Like you turn a camera on in front of me, and this is just the voice that comes out. It's just like habitual now. It is different from my regular voice though. Like the way I describe it is like when I talk normally, I talk out of my mouth, but I talk at the top of my throat when I do a podcast. And it takes me like similar to that podcast high where it takes some time to come like work off of. My girlfriend always says when I come out after a podcast, I have my podcast voice when I talk to her, similar to when someone works in retail and they have their quote unquote retail voice when they talk to customers and they still have that voice when they come home. I have my podcast voice. It takes a little while to kind of cool off as well to get back to my regular voice, but I don't do anything like specific. It's just like kind of naturally developed as I did the podcast. I didn't sit down and try and think of how do I make my voice sound the best. It's just like how it ended up happening. And I would never have thought that I'd have a voice for podcasting, but people have said that to me a couple of times.
Then what about preserving it? Like, will you not speak for a couple of hours before you do a podcast? Is there like a specific drink that you drink to save it afterwards?
No, nothing. It's just I don't know how. It's just like a natural thing that I didn't plan for. The only thing I do is like I'll try not to drink a ton of water, so I don't have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the interview. But like the only time where it's bad is when I wake up. Like I did an interview shortly after I woke up a little while ago, and I listened back to it recently, and like my voice is like super deep because I have like my morning voice, but I'm also doing my podcast voice on top of my morning voice, and like my voice is super deep in that one. But no, nothing specific or special, or no drinks or remedies, or I don't rest it. I just roll with it.
This, for
Is
me,
that Fanta?
for some weird reason, Fanta, when I'm doing an interview, if I have a Fanta, my voice sounds better for video. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
And I've talked a lot about myself in this, and I do apologize.
Not really. No need to apologize, man. It's a conversation.
Like, yeah, but that is one comment that I'm getting a lot is stop talking about yourself. So do you have, like, if a guest asks you questions about yourself, and I just realized we filled 10 minutes when I thought we were going to finish 10 minutes ago, which is really cool.
Yeah.
It's like,
No, it's cool, man.
Do you have like a cut-off point where a guest will ask you about something and you're like, look, I've told that story enough times, I'll tell you off camera, sort of thing?
No, I just roll with it. And like I don't get asked questions by my guests a ton either, which is why I always get stoked when people say that my podcasts are very conversational, because it's very much like me just asking questions, and I don't talk about myself a lot. And that's by design, obviously, because like my guest is there. I want to get as much from my guest as possible. But if they ask me questions, like I'll always answer them, even if I've said them in the past. Like not everyone listens to every interview, and hopefully when you have a guest, their audience is coming over and this is their first introduction to you. So if your guest does ask you a question, it's your way to kind of introduce yourself to that audience. So I'm always happy to answer my guest questions, and I'm very big on trying to just keep the interview flowing and doing as much as possible to not disrupt that flow. And so to just kind of stop their question and just ask something else feels a little disjointed. So I just always answer, just make sure that it just keeps flowing the entire way.
No, I totally understand that. And that is, again, something I've learned from you. I will say that.
Oh, yeah? Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You know this, and this is going to sound like he's sponsoring me to say this, but you know, like the amount of messages that I've sent. I've even sent you clips of my work and been like, if you wouldn't mind checking this out and just telling me where I can improve, etc. And I want you to know, man, I've taken all of your advice on board. That was the word I was looking for, and my brain is now, I don't know.
No, I appreciate that, dude. That's cool to hear. And again, it's not a lot of work for me, so I don't ever stress about asking me questions and stuff. And I'm happy to hear that what I'm telling you is helpful, because I really don't know sometimes if I'm just like I never want to point you in the wrong direction. So I'm glad to hear you're able to apply it and it works.
One that I'll give is, you told me, Tom, you really need to sort Zoom out for yourself. You can't rely on your guests.
I just wanted because you asked me, like, do you think that's going to be a deterrent from getting people to call my show if I asked them to record it? And I said it would, because you want to make it as easy as possible for anybody that's coming on your show to just jump in there and not have to worry about it after that.
Mm-hmm. The only thing I've found with that is I have to do my interviews a lot later, because I have to use a specific room in my house so that, and my family's all gone to bed by that point, just so I can come out and use that room, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, but like, is there another piece of advice that I will ask you to tell specific interviewers is, would you say to them that they need the greatest equipment to record their stuff, or a specific room in their house to record?
You can do a podcast on your phone. If you were desperate enough to do a podcast and you didn't have gear, you can do a podcast on your phone. I watched a video on TikTok recently. It was of a podcast that had like, I think 2 million likes, and the guys were using microphones. Let me see if I have one here, because this is all video. I can show this, but like, it was literally it was two guys doing a podcast, and they each had a mic like this that they were just holding up, a small
lapel mic, I think they're called.
Lapel mic, exactly. And they recorded a podcast on lapel mics.
Media study paid off.
Yeah, but the gear does not matter. Obviously, gear can make the quality sound better, and if you can, by all means. But by no means is it mandatory to have the best gear. I don't even have the best gear. I have the best quote unquote budget USB mic. I have a Blue Yeti microphone. It costs, I don't know, the equivalent of pounds, probably like 65, 70 pounds. So 130, $135 is what I paid for it. And I figured out how to get the best out of this microphone. And so it works well for me. So it's using what you have and figuring out how to get the best out of it. But like realistically, have you ever sent anybody an audio message on your phone?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like have you ever listened back to an audio message and be like, oh, that doesn't sound good? Probably not.
I don't understand the question. I'm not gonna lie.
So like if you've ever sent or received an audio message and listened back to it, you've never been like, oh, that's a really terrible sounding message. Because the audio quality is not that bad, just using your phone. So you can record a podcast on your phone and upload it to that Anchor app I told you about, and you can have a podcast from your phone. And so realistically, gear does not matter. Whatever you have, if you are watching this interview in some way, shape, or form, you have enough gear to start your podcast.
It's like I started, I don't know if I told you this during our previous one, on my iPad, literally recording from my iPad on my Zoom. And then I was lucky enough for my birthday to get a new laptop, and that improved my gear. And fingers crossed I may have it by the time this goes live, but I've asked for a microphone for Christmas.
Nice.
So fingers crossed, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you. But again, like it's just, and then if you start with low gear, even when your stuff does get better, then people will just appreciate the higher quality. Like people aren't asking for higher quality, but they'll appreciate it when it gets there. But by no means you have to have it right away.
It's like, I'm sure I asked you this during our last conversation, but you do your editing all yourself, correct? All the booking of guests is all you, all that. But has that changed since you've been working with TrueFan at all?
No, I'm a one-man operation. I handle all of it, which is good. So, I mean, I enjoy it. I mean, ultimately it'd be cool to kind of be able to outsource some of it. It's just money I'm not up to spending at the moment. But no, it's all me.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's why I stopped outsourcing my editing, because the guy was doing it for free. And then at a certain point, he was just like, so am I going to get paid for this at any point? And I just didn't have the financial capital to say to him, look, I can pay you this. Do you know what I mean?
No, 100%. That's why that's why an operation of one, because it's money that I don't necessarily have to just throw around to pay people to edit my stuff. So I just do it. And I've scaled it. I've got to a point now where it doesn't take me too long. I can usually do everything in a couple hours. So it's not too bad.
Because I had someone ask me this question the other day. Is it also out of being a bit of a control freak?
I don't think so. Not as much. I feel like if I were to outsource my editing, they would probably do a better job, to be completely honest. And it's not really, I think the only where I would be control freak is with the research, because people are like, why don't you outsource the research? Because I think I need to do the research myself just to do the interviews in the way that I do.
To know more about the guest, I suppose.
Yeah, if someone just handed me pages of research, it wouldn't be the same. So I feel like that's where I will definitely, if I'm ever in a point where I can outsource stuff, I'll probably have to hold on to the research part of it. But I'd pretty much be happy to outsource everything else.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I'm curious about is like, this is a segment I call generic questions, because they're questions probably everyone's asked you, but they're questions that I want to know that I haven't seen been asked. So I'm going to ask them anyway, if that's okay.
Do it.
Favorite podcast that you've recorded?
That I've recorded? Oh, man.
I'll put it this way. Favorite episode of My Social Life. I should have said that.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a favorite, to be completely honest. That's a very hard question for me to give an answer to. And I don't think I have a good one. Obviously, the Starbucks one comes to mind, because that was just a big one for me, the co-founder of Starbucks. I just recorded my third interview with my friend Sean Does Magic. He's a TikToker with 20 million followers. That was a great podcast. Joe Santagato, this YouTuber I used to watch growing up in high school. I still watch him. But I had him on the show recently. So that was a really cool one for me. Zach Honover Who Manages Yes Theory in Iraq, episode number 95. I think that was a fun one. And I think I could sit here and just list off episodes for days, like some of those ones in New York, Caleb Ralston, Brandon Hatcher, Buster Scher from New York. Those were awesome. Ilana Wiles, who goes by Mommy Shorts. Another, like, I could just sit here and list them all off. Like, I love all of my podcasts for different reasons and in different ways. And so for me to pick one is just not possible. Every time even now, like, as I've listed a bunch, I'm like, oh, what about this interview and that interview and this one that I don't want to leave anybody out. And I love, like I said, I love them all in their own unique way that I can never pick my absolute favorite.
It's like for the first couple of uploads of next year, people might consider this lazy, but I'm doing like top 10 interviews I've done this year, and then top 10, putting it out into the universe, almost top 10 interviews I'd love to do next year. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I hear you.
Like, I sat right in my top 10 the other day. FYI, you are on it somewhere, but I can't remember which one.
I appreciate that. I will always come on Tom Talks Rubbish. You never have to worry about me saying no.
I was
I'll always come back on the show.
To peel the story back, I obviously part one hasn't aired at time of recording, and that was one of my, I want to say, first interviews I did.
I remember being early, because I remember you saying you mainly, there's a couple guys from not What Culture, I think, but something else. But Cultaholic, but for the most part, been your friends that had come on. Yeah,
my first outsourced interview. And then I watched it back because I've really got into, this is going to sound really strange, but like watching unaired videos to help me fall asleep.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I watched it back and was like, now that I've done more, I felt like I could do so much better.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense. And of course, you'll get better just by putting the reps in and doing more interviews. You're naturally going to get better.
I was like, I could do so much better. So I was like, I'm going to DM him. If he's busy before Christmas, we'll make it happen next year. And then when you were like, yes, 100%, I'm there in a heartbeat, I was like, cool.
Yeah, man. No, I'll always come back on the show. And I will say one thing, with your top 10 guests for next year, like, dream bigger than me. Dream bigger than me. Shoot for the stars. I'll come on your show. But I wouldn't consider myself a top 10.
I've been very lucky with not just yourself, but the guests that I've managed to get through since I've been uploading. What's the word I'm looking for? You're good with words, Jacob.
Consistently.
No, like since I've been uploading interviews with people I don't know.
Oh, just with, I don't know, not strangers, but interviewing just people you don't know is probably the way I would describe it.
Yeah. I've been very lucky with the amount of people that have said yes. And to peel the curtain back, people that have said yes for next year already.
Awesome. That's good.
Do you consider yourself lucky?
I think to an extent, but again, what we talked about, I think the work is a big factor. Like, I don't think I talked to a lot of the people that I've talked to had I not put in the work to do my podcast. If that makes sense. Like, I don't have a conversation with the co-founder of Starbucks if I haven't done 105 episodes before that make him comfortable saying yes to come on the show. He's going to stick around for 90 minutes if I don't do the work to show that I've prepped a time for the interview. Like, it wasn't lucky that he stayed longer. It wasn't lucky that he came on the show. It wasn't lucky that Joe Santagato came on the show. I will say the luckiest I got was stumbling onto Shonda's Magic early on. Because like I said, I found him when he had 1 million followers on TikTok, and he's absolutely exploded, but he's just a good dude. And so I was lucky to find him when I found him. But for the most part, it's just, I don't think luck has been a big factor for me thus far.
Mm-hmm. So getting back to generic questions, the guests that you could say that you've done, and then like, I know that you won't retire, but like, okay, I've interviewed this person now. I'm happy with my body of work.
I think I'm already happy with my body of work. I think it's important to be happy with where you're at now.
That might be the wrong phrase then, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, guests that you're like, okay, I've interviewed this person now. I'm not going to do any more because I can't get any higher.
I don't think that'll ever happen. I mean, like, there will, I'm not going to, I don't know when or what the circumstance that they were. I don't know if I'm not doing this podcast or I'm not interviewing or anything like that. Maybe I start selling my screenplays and I can do that full time. Who knows? But no, I'm kidding. Not really. But now who knows? There might ever be a circumstance where the podcast ends, but there will never be like, oh, I've interviewed Gary Vaynerchuk, show's over. Like the only like it would I'll keep doing the interviews because I love doing the interviews. I'm not doing the interviews to get to a certain person. I'm doing it because I enjoy interviewing. So there's a lot of people in this world. So there's not one specific person that will make me shut the show down.
Okay. Least favorite podcast you've done, like of my social life.
I don't know if I could pick a least favorite one. Like I said, I love them all for different reasons. And so because I love them all, there isn't really a least favorite one. I think like I could say that John Lee Dumas one, because like I think I approached it in the wrong way with only having 50 minutes. Like I tried to pack my 90-minute interview where I talk about the story from beginning to end into 15 minutes. And that's not what I should have done. But I love that interview because I got a chance to talk to John, and I can like remember like his power went out. He lives in Puerto Rico. His power went out. And so my 15 minutes got cut down to 12, and like I had a heart attack because I thought something went wrong because I had really bad Wi-Fi at the time. So I thought it was my fault. Then he jumps back on. He's like, yo, I'm so sorry. The power went out, but I have 11 minutes now. And I was like, all right, let's do this. So I even love that interview, but I just that I approached it wrong, which is probably the reason that one came to mind. But like, I still love that interview. So it's like, like I said, I love all of them.
Most surprising fact you found out about a guest when researching?
I don't know, because I try to find something surprising every time. You know what I mean? Like I try to have at least one or two things in the interview where they'll look at me.
I should have prepped you on these questions.
How did you know that? No, that's okay. I think like I won't say most surprising thing, but like the one where I found the most surprising stuff was with this guy named Parker Heuser, who is a YouTuber from a group of YouTubers that I watched when I was in college. And I love this YouTube group, and I got a chance to interview him as one of the co-founders of this group. And I had like the story, like I had a lot of early stuff that like he wasn't expecting me to know. So I put out like a reel of that interview of like 2 minutes of him just being like, I don't know how you figure that out. So that was probably, it's not a direct answer to your question, but what came to mind.
Okay. Like this isn't a generic question, but it's a question that I'm curious to know now. Have you ever had a guest go, I don't want to talk about that, you shouldn't know about that, with the amount of research that you do?
Never, you should know about that. But I had there very rarely where that does happen, where someone will say like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. But I always preface each of my guests when we get in the call for the first time, I always tell them like, if I ask you anything, there shouldn't be. I really hope there isn't. But if there is something that I ask you that you're not comfortable answering, please just tell me. Like, don't worry about that. And I will just edit it out. I'll edit it out in such a way where the person listening won't even know that like we awkwardly cut that out. Like I will just cut out. And so the interview continues to flow. No one will ever know. I'll also send you the podcast when it's done. And if there's anything that you did say that you wish you hadn't, let me know and I'll take that out as well. So I like to let them know that they have that air cover to say no to a question. If they do, then they do. Like I never want to make anybody uncomfortable coming on my show. So has it happened? Maybe once or twice, a couple times more than that, but very rarely.
Have you ever had a guest go like, no, have you ever been interviewing someone and then been like, I didn't think we'd go down this road, or I didn't think they'd be as open on this topic. And then you were like, okay, I'm just going to go with this. Because they were so open on a specific topic that maybe it overran for other topics.
Yeah, I mean, that's happened every once in a while where you get down a tangent that even I wasn't expecting on. But like sometimes that can be some of the best stuff when you go somewhere you are least expecting. Sometimes that's where you get into territory where people, they almost like they feel comfortable in the interview, but then after the fact, they don't necessarily feel comfortable about going else. I've had instances where we've gone down a tangent, we've gone far down a tangent that I wasn't expecting, and we got to some places that were very personal that we took out, and that's totally fine. But it doesn't happen too often. But like I said, if I know we're going down a tangent, sometimes I just like ride down that tangent, because sometimes if we're going somewhere I don't know where we're going, then I feel like most people won't know either.
Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy, because of the amount of research that you do you enjoy when things go down a place that you didn't expect? Or are you like, I don't know what to do now?
No. And it's never been, I don't know what to do. And like, even if we do go down a tangent, I'm I can do enough that I can bring it back in a pretty natural way. Like we go down tangent, but I can steer us back to the conversation. But I try and just ride down that tangent as long as I possibly can because it's fun. And it also challenges me as an interviewer because I haven't prepped for these questions. So I'm kind of thinking on the fly. So I enjoy the tangents for sure.
Like, so do I. I think that's the most fun part about interviewing, if I'm honest, is sometimes, like, this is the thing of interviewing people I don't know that's been fun. Because I told you last time that interviewing my friends, I knew exactly where we'd be going because I prepped them on questions. Like, when I've interviewed certain people and it's been like, how did we get here? But I never expected them to go here. This has been so cool.
That can be the best. Yeah, I agree.
And this has been really cool. And I'm going to wrap us up now because
no worries, man.
We have been going a lot longer than I thought we would. But I've just been chatting with my buddy for an hour or so. Do you know what I mean?
That's just it, man. Yeah, no, 100%.
It was
I enjoy it.
To peel the curtain back, we didn't have a plan. I didn't have a plan. I had a few questions written out because I didn't want to rehash old ground. I'll put it that way. But
that's a good point. Yeah.
I just wanted to do a part 2 and not right the wrongs always sounds wrong, but you know what I mean. Like, do a better interview than I did last time. So I asked you this question last time, like, out of 10, my interviews, and where can I improve?
I'll honestly say the one thing that you can improve, but you did improve. I feel like in the beginning, you were very much like it took you a minute to settle in. I feel like you relied on your notes in the beginning, but as the interview went on, you stopped using your notes less and less. That's the one thing I caught this time, but that's not a big deal, really. At the end of the day,
I did that a lot more during our previous one. I'll say that.
Exactly right, and so you're already getting better, and so I think it's not even a big deal, and I think you settled into it really, really well, and like the best example of that is you thought you were going to wrap up 25 minutes ago, but then we freestyled it, which is great, and it's not a bad thing by any means. But I just know at the beginning I think you were in the notes, and again that's coming from me though, so I feel hypocritical because my whole interview I'm in the notes. But that's just the one thing that I noticed. But you settled in really, really well, man, and I think you crushed it.
Do you think I've improved since we last spoke?
Yeah, definitely.
What about the interrupting?
I think I honestly didn't really notice it early on, and then you called yourself out for interrupting, and then I felt like I didn't even notice. Like I hadn't thought about it until you said it, and then because even though I was thinking about it, I didn't notice it after that. So I feel like because you acknowledged early on, you were also aware, and so you weren't interrupting at all. So I hadn't noticed it before you said anything, and then once you said it, I was kind of looking for it to see if you do it just out of curiosity, and I didn't really notice you doing it after that. So I think that you did great.
I say this all the time when we speak, but when we come on or when we do stuff like this, guys, if you're looking for a podcast, Jacob is the man. Definitely check out My Social Life. Do you want to plug some upcoming guests? But I know this won't go out till the end of December.
Yeah, you're further ahead than me, so anything I'm plugging now is in the past. The first thing I will plug before you check out My Social Life, I think I said this last time, but make sure if you haven't already, you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish.
Sorry, carry on. Keep plugging.
No, you're good, man. I was just going to say, make sure you subscribe here. This interview doesn't happen without Tom, and so make sure you show him some love before you click off here to try and find my show. If that's something you're going to do, make sure you just go down, you hit that big red subscribe button. Do that for me, please. That'd mean a lot to me if you subscribe to Tom. And if you want to check out my show, My Social Life, wherever you get your podcasts, some of the upcoming interviews we have, I already mentioned Sean Does Magic, TikToker with 20 million, Apple Kreider, who runs an agency that represents some of the biggest finance YouTubers on the planet, like Graham Stephan, I don't know how to say his name. Who else do I have coming up? I just recorded one with Adam Ferris, who's growing a TikTok media company, multiple accounts. Adam Ferris? I don't think you'd know this guy.
Might be someone different that I'm thinking of.
Might be. So there's some of the ones I have coming up right now.
And
just a few.
Then I know we talked about this during the interview, but who is one guest that you're like, that has got to happen in 2022?
There isn't really one. Honestly, the one that's got to happen is if I can do an interview with Sean Does Magic in person. If I get the chance, like he's just a good buddy of mine now, and we've done an interview every year for the last 3 years. So our fourth one could be in person. That would be awesome.
Ooh,
But
one
yeah,
question that I forgot to ask, and I do apologize, is
no need.
because the only interviews I could find with you were via Zoom. Did you do in-person interviews beforehand?
Yeah, I used to back in the day. I mean, pre-COVID, I've only done one since the last like year and a half, and that's with the rapper Tiag from TikTok.
Oh, I saw that one.
Yeah, he's a good dude. That's a cool story. But so I used to do them in person all the time. It used to only be in person actually until like episode 30 something. Or I think I tried one episode 17 and it went so bad I was afraid of doing remote ones after that. But yeah, I used to be all in person. Now I'm all remote.
Was that the one with the guy, the one that you said you were afraid of doing them remotely? Was that the one with the guy whose power went out?
No, that was episode 17. It was with pilot Luana, and she was a helicopter pilot from Brazil living in Vancouver. And I tried to do it on Skype, and the Skype connection was so bad. Like I probably shouldn't have even put that interview out, but I did. I've never not put an interview out. But yeah, that was the one. It was pilot Luana. I think it was like 17.
A piece of advice you gave me randomly, which was put the interview out. Like, even if you don't like it, like it shows where you've come from.
Exactly. People can see the progression. If they go back and watch one of my interviews now that I do remotely versus that first one, you can just see how far I've come.
So because I've asked you where I improved. And again, we keep talking, but this is fun anyway.
Oh, good, man. Yeah.
So, like, where is some areas you feel like you've improved this year? And then where is some that you're like, okay, I need to improve on this next year for my social life?
I think the biggest one that I've improved this year is just kind of like reducing the volume of work has been a big one. You know, I've scaled my edits down to 2 hours, my prep work down to 2 days instead of more than that. I think that's been a big one for me, is trying to make it more sustainable because I am just a one person team. So trying to do everything wasn't the most sustainable. I did sustain it for a long period of time, and I still am, but trying to make that a little bit more reasonable and stop putting like ridiculous demands on myself. That's been the biggest one. I think moving in 2022, it's probably just going to continue to make it sustainable, find ways to make it even more sustainable if I can, continue to improve as an interviewer because I don't think I'll ever be done improving. That's the big one, and look for just little ways to try to find ways to grow the show more than it has. And then just see what happens. But like, I think the biggest one is just staying consistent and continue getting better.
Mm-hmm. And then this is the question that I now end all my videos on, because I've changed it since the last time you were on, is what is, with YouTube, with podcasting, with any form of social media, good or bad, for good or bad, should I say, we're all going to sort of live forever in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and provided the earth doesn't self-destruct. So what is one video that you're like, and I know we covered this a little bit in generic questions, but what is one video that you're like, I've improved a lot since then, like, I don't recommend that one. And then what is one that you're like, yes, I'm so happy with that. If you want to know my body of work for my social life or etc., check that one out.
Yeah, I mean, for the first one, the one that I'm not like, I think like that pilot Luana one's a good one to just see how far I've come learning how to edit. I even think my first episode, if you go back, you can just see I didn't know what I was doing. That episode took me 24 hours to edit. It sounds worse than every episode I've edited in 2 hours. So I think even going back to the first episode, I think that'd be if you wanted to get the full scope and context of that body of work, let's go back to that first episode. And again, I'm really proud of that Starbucks, the co-founder of Starbucks interview. So that'd probably be my other answer is start with one and then go 106 would probably be it. But like, you're right with the fact that with the internet and stuff, like it can kind of help us live forever to some degree. And that's why I do these like little vlogs that like I don't broadcast. Like I put them up there for people to watch if they want to, but like they're not serious. They get like 7 views and it's probably just me rewatching it 7 times.
I enjoy your vlogs.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But it's gonna be cool to go back. Like even now, I go back and watch my vlogs from 3 years ago to see what I was doing, what I was thinking, who I was hanging out with, like all these things. But it's gonna be crazy to do that in 30 years and go back and watch my vlog right now. And it's just gonna be it's just really, really cool to me. And I think that's it's a cool call out that you made there. But that's cool. And then like your kids are going to be able to watch it, and your grandkids. Like I would pay a disgusting amount of money to watch like my granddad's vlog. Like, do you know how much I would pay for that? Like how cool that would be? Like, that's just something I think about all the time.
That question started coming up because I told you about this during the previous interview, but was with Adam Pacitti was my first big interview, and I remember asking him that in that interview. Then I did the one with you, and then it went away, and then I did it with someone else, and it came up again, and that actually got a decent comment of, I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before in that way or asked, and then people were like, you should do that. So that's sort of where that came from. And again, I'm rambling now. So just remind the people where they can find your good stuff, Jacob, before we wrap this up.
If you want to find my previous interview with Tom, you can find that on Tom Talks Rubbish. That'd be the first place to check out if you haven't watched it already.
Stop plugging me.
But if you do want to find me, my Social Life Podcast, wherever you get your podcast, I'm at the Kelly on social media. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. But thank you again, Tom, for having me on the show, man. It's always fun, and I'll always be down to do it.
Like, I don't know if you find this, but I find it, because I had it the other day. Someone recognized me when I was out, and it was like,
oh, that's cool.
It was like, this is cool, but it's cringy at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
I've never been recognized in public to my face. Like my brother and I look kind of similar, and he's a photographer, so he works with different people in the city. And so like sometimes they'll know that he's my brother or I'm his brother, but I have no idea who they are. So like people have mentioned me to my brother that I have no idea who they are, but no one has ever come up in public and recognized me from the internet.
I'll tell you the story off camera before we wrap the Zoom call up, but I don't want to tell it on camera, if that's okay.
All right. That's cool, man. It's your show.
To find the peak, to basically, what was I going to say? Check out My Social Life wherever you get your podcasts. They're on. Just remind me, Jacob, because my memory does not work very well.
Yeah, so you get Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We're also on YouTube if you want to watch the full video versions of all of our podcasts. Those are there as well. So yeah, the main podcast, but there's probably some smaller ones I'm not naming, but just search up My Social Life and it should come up. MySocialLifePodcast.com. Also, if that can redirect you to your podcast player of choice.
It's well worth doing. And for all the people that ask me, where has your second intro video come from? This is the great man that provided that for me during our first interview.
I appreciate it. It's cool that you using it for all your podcasts. That's all, or all your interviews, I should say. That's cool. It's me and Adam, right? It's kind of back to back, the two of us.
It's Adam, and then it transition, and then it's your good self, yeah. But anyway, before we go on for another hour, I'm going to say, guys, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm on the road to 500 by the end of the year. We are super, super close. But obviously, the main person to check out in this is Jacob. So check out My Social Life wherever you find your podcast. Check out Tom Talks Rubbish. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.